Ah, the lovely Mr. Robert. Ah, over 30 years I know him through all sorts of chaos and catastrophes. He always had a smile on his face. He was always upbeat and positive, always had time for a little chat. And, the best bit of advice he gave to me was keep smiling and the show will go on. Good luck wherever you are, Mr. Robert.
I think the best piece of advice I ever heard from Robert, and to be honest, in 13 years of working with him, I heard this advice a lot, was leave it to me. And whether that was talking down a slightly out of control printer who was dancing on top of an industrial printing press, or persuading a pilot of a light aircraft who'd been employed by a major fashion brand to fly a marketing message over the festival that actually no, he didn't want to do that. Or even on one occasion, I'd booked a couple of nights at the Glastonbury Premier Inn, very salubrious establishment, to come down for a meeting at the farm. But then the meeting got moved, and I happened to mention to Robert that the meeting had been moved and this was a no cancellation booking. And he said, leave it to me, leave it to me. And sure enough, even though I couldn't even manage to find a phone number for the hotel or an email address or anything, he managed to get in touch with them. He spoke to the manager, and within about an hour, I'd had an email telling me that I'd got a refund. So yeah, I will definitely miss hearing that bit of advice from Robert, because you really could leave him to sort anything and he would.
I'm not sure that Robert ever gave me a direct piece of advice or told me what to do, and he could have on so many occasions. But what I appreciate the most is that he set a great example and showed me the way that I should do things more than told me.
Ever since I took on the role as area organiser for the John Peel stage, Robert was always there to encourage me, to support me, to offer advice whenever I needed it. And I've been asked what was the best piece of advice that Robert ever gave. And that's a difficult one. I think really it was the advice I got from him came not so much from his words, but from his actions, the way he dealt with things. And I learnt from him that there's always a solution to whatever problem, challenge, difficulty might be there in front of you. There's always a solution for it. And I'm finding that increasingly important, especially this year as we face different challenges after the lockdown, after COVID.
If there was one thing that I would say Robert told me on numerous occasions, it was leave it with me. He said, leave it with me about numerous major issues. And every time he said, leave it with me, he'd call back half an hour later and say, Emily, it's done. He was so incredible at just tackling any issue you threw at him. We will miss him so much. We'll miss his time that he gave to the festival, his commitment, his energy, his humour and his warmth, and his dedication. So, Robert, we'll miss you so much.
Robert was a passionate, forthright man with whom I had the pleasure of working for 7 years in connection with the recently completed affordable housing scheme at Maggie's Farm in Pilton, and also the latest phase of development, which is due to commence on site in the spring. During those 7 years, I had many conversations with Robert, and our relationship developed into one of professional respect and personal friendship.
Maybe it's best to use public transport instead of owning another car. To me, that was sound advice, based upon Robert's poor record of slowly but surely crashing or going through Jaguars.
What I learnt from him is just immense. Give people my full attention. Listen intently. Put yourself in their shoes. Treat everybody with respect and don't judge anybody. He also taught me to ask why. Why is it important to somebody? What is it that really matters to them? And to just think round the problems and to trust my gut.
Robert was a kind and thoughtful man who could always work through a problem to find a solution. He would say with a smile on his face, issues can always be resolved.
He was an extremely professional person, and also he was a very kind, caring man. One of the questions that got asked, what would be something that you would remember Robert by, or what did he give you in regards to good advice. And I always remember the time, and he looked me straight in the eye and he said, "Steve," he said, "never travel around the festival site with me as a passenger in a car or a vehicle." And that made me think. And I reflected back the time when he was on his way up to pick Prince Charles up and he ran into a fence post. Yeah, that probably didn't look too good with Prince Charles's security team. There was another time when I was following behind in a Land Rover with a security team where he was in a Land Rover in front with Jeremy Corbyn. And he ran straight into a Harris panel fence.
When I try to think of the best piece of advice that Robert ever gave me, it's hard to think of one piece that stands above the rest. I always found it so inspiring how he treated me and everyone around him. Robert was so kind, supportive, and most of all generous with his time. We first met back in 2013 when we were planning our first interstage restaurant for the festival the following year. Looking back on it, I was very young, and a project of this scale was a scary prospect for me, but I always felt as though I had Robert's full support. He would always make time to talk through problems with me, and would often either help me reframe them to realise they weren't huge problems after all, or help me find a way to solve them. He was always there to advise me on how to ask for the things I needed, or rather what I thought was important. I think it was this special way of taking people's needs and feelings into consideration that made him such a well-loved part of the festival. If I take anything from Robert, it's to treat everybody how he treated me. Always seeing the best in me, always wanting me to succeed, and always making me smile, even in the most stressful of situations. He always managed to make me feel like I can and will achieve anything. Robert was an incredibly special man, and I feel very lucky to have met and worked for him for the time I did.
One of the things that I would say about Robert is that he will be greatly missed. He'd done an awful lot for the festival and other things relating to Glastonbury.
Myself, Dougie, Roger, everyone who works in the barn enjoyed his company and appreciated his honesty. Even Roger, and that is particularly amazing because Roger doesn't like anybody.
So I'd say the best piece of advice Robert ever gave me was finding the joy in all of the problems that could come up in the world of events. Whenever we'd meet up, he took real delight in talking me through all of the creative and often genius ways he'd come up with to solve the problems that can come up in managing all things Glastonbury. So yeah, that's really going to stick with me no matter what the problem. There's often a solution and often a really good story on the other side of it. So thank you for that, Robert.
I'm reminded all the time that whatever problem is there, there's a solution for it if you just look for it. So thank you, Robert, for all that you did for me.